I've been printing quite a number of test cubes, and that's basically so that I can test each particular filament I have with a consistent print file, which it just happens to be the artillery test cube. But I've got this really nice colour filament from ICE Filaments called Obstinate Orange, and what I really wanted to do was print our logo. And in order to do that, basically I've created a new Blender file, and then I've imported the test cube, and then I basically creating my logo in relation to similar size and proportions of the test cube. So we can see it imported here, and this is really handy because it just gives me some kind of scale to work towards basically. So the first thing I did was to add a mesh and a cube, and this appeared as a cube shape, and then I went into its scaling options and then basically reduced its height so that it was much lower in height. So I've got this basically flat, what will be a flat piece of plastic, and then I wanted to carve out the logo so that you've got empty space, basically holes in the plastic. So what I did then is I created some text, and once I'd got that text to the right size and in position and also the right depth, so that the text was overlapping the height or a flattened cube, I then converted it to a mesh. And then what I could do is I could select the base layer and then go into the options for boolean, and then basically cut out the object from the base. So you can see here that I've got 3D selected and I've got ModUK selected, and then by basically using those booleans, it can cut a shape out of the base layer, hence creating 3DModUK. Now, thinking ahead on this, what I wanted to ensure was that I didn't end up losing the center of text. Now we can see here that we've got this line here, so basically where the 3 and the D aren't quite touching, we've got this area of what should be plastic, which will allow this to be one piece so we don't lose this center bit. When it comes to the D and the O in D and then the O, the worry is that that will stick to the bed and I'll lose the middle. So essentially what I've done here is I created another cube and then basically flattened it in terms of its size and shape so that it's basically just a bar, and then I position that bar so that it's holding, effectively will hold in the center of that D, and then I shrunk the bar even further so that it'll basically keep the middle of the O and the D as well. So the plan, and then basically I can export that so that I can then print it. So if we get rid of this particular cube, and then when we go to export and STL, now one of the really important things we do is we make sure we use selection only. Now the reason for that is that if I export everything, it will actually include the 3D and the ModUK elements, if you like, the text that I converted to a mesh, and that means that I'll actually end up with a solid 3D object, and you won't be able to distinguish the 3D and the ModUK because I actually want that cut out. So the important thing to do is to select the items that you want to export. So in this case it needs to be the base layer, plus it needs to be that line there, and I'm pressing shift so that I can multi-select, and if I zoom in I can press shift on that and shift click on that. So essentially I've got 4 items selected. So I've got the base layer itself, I've got the line going through the D, and then the line through the O, and then the other D, and that ensures that all of these items, as we can see here, will be part of the selection that I then export. So if I go to export and then go to STL and then click on selection only and then export that, and then basically what we'll end up with is the elements that we need with the cutouts of 3D and ModUK, and we can see that if we go into our slicer, which I will do now. So here we have Ultimaker Cura, which is a piece of software that allows you to slice and prepare 3D printing models, and I actually really like this because it's nice, easy to use software. It's got a profile for the Sidewinder X1 and I'm getting very good results coming out of it. So we open our file. So I've saved a number of versions as I was working on it, but 3DMod6 is the one which we're using. And if we actually look at that on the bed, as we can see here, it's going to print right in the center. And if I zoom in, we can see that our lines are present. So we've got this one going through the 3, this one going through the D, through the O, through the D, and that all looks good. And we can see that it's going to be 36.5 millimeters by 36.5 millimeters, and then 2.3 millimeters thick. And then what we can do is basically, I mean, we could position that anywhere on the bed. We can make changes to it in terms of, if we select it, we can scale it up, we can scale it down, we can rotate it as necessary. We can even, well, we can do all manner of things to it, mirror it, etc. But basically, because I want to print it as is, and I'm happy with all of the default settings in terms of the profile, print, and the infill, I don't need support. But the support is by default seems to be on most of the time, which for some models is fine, for others it doesn't matter. So we can remove support in this particular case because there's nothing to support because it's a flat object. And then we click on slice, and basically we can see that it's going to weigh 2 grams. I was going to use 2 grams of filament, which is 0.76 of a meter, and it's going to take 1 hour 6 minutes, amazingly, even though it's such a small flat object with the space in the middle. Anyway, we click on save to disk, and then we can save it as our gcode file, and then we can print it to the printer. So we've just printed our test cube, which is in this nice bright orange. So we're going to use the same orange filament from ICE, and we're going to print the logo. So I'm going to switch to time-lapse mode, and we can see how this is printing. It'll take about an hour, so it's going to be quite a while. So even though it's only 2.31 millimeters thick, it's quite amazing how long it takes. So switching over to time-lapse mode now. So here we can see that the 3DModUK logo that I printed has finished, and before I lift it from the bed, one of the things that I was considering is how this was going to print. And obviously when you're looking at the 3D model, you've got the text, and I've cut the text out of the actual flat bit itself, the main part of the logo. And I was very considerate because I didn't want to lose the middle of the D, so I put in a little support between the outer D and the inner D, and then I shrunk that support down so it was even smaller, so that it had the O, the middle of the O, and the middle of the smaller D protected as well. So if I lift it up, spot the error, there we go. So I've missed the middle of the 3 and the D, so that's why that's stuck on the bed. And also because I'd made the O and the D much smaller supports, we can see that it's kind of blended with the top of the O and missing the bottom of the O, but the D's not too bad. But one of the things I found with this particular orange filament by ICE Filaments is that I think it might have been a little bit too hot, the temperature, because one of the issues I had with the cube, the test cube, and this is one of the reasons why I like to do these different tests, to see how a consistent print differs with different filament, is that when I removed that from the bed, whilst you got this outer brim, I think it's called, you've actually got some of the brim left against the actual cube itself, so it hasn't come away, it's part of it. Whereas if you look at the other previous one I did, we can see that it's separated really nicely. So when you compare the two, one of the problems you have is that the lines are much closer together, and I think if this was a little bit too hot, I think perhaps it leaked and blended all of the lines together. So this one's come out fine, but this one, it's okay. Again, at least it's all consistent and uniform, and it's very neat. It's just that base was never intended to be there. But I'll leave that there. It's not an issue. It's more about the colour reproduction and the consistency, knowing how it'll print, and understanding the different nuances of all the different types of filament and the colours and that type of thing. So still an interesting experiment. So quite happy with my little logo here. It's very smooth on the bottom, it's fairly smooth on top. You just feel a bit of kind of lines and everything. You just about see those, I think. But I mean, overall it's still a very good quality print, and at least you can see what it says, or read what it says. So all in all, very interesting little experiments, and definitely getting to understand the printer a little bit better, and also all the different filaments. So thank you for watching.